Hey guys, welcome back to User Experience Points. This week we're going to look at Defiance. This is actually the first massively multiplayer online RPG that I've covered on the show, so I was pretty excited to see how it handles all the different menus that are usually required for a large game like this. I can only imagine how difficult it must be to develop a positive user experience when you have so many different interactions that you need to cover. Thankfully, the game does have a pretty positive user experience overall thanks to some really strong patterns that are used consistently. Although getting the most out of these experiences involves way too much poking around without any help from the game. I had a little help in my research this week from my buddy Jackson, who's a much more experienced Defiance player than I am. Say hi, Jackson. Fantastic. He was kind enough to give me some insight on how the game teaches you things beyond the initial tutorial, and help me get my hands on a sword so I could actually have fun with the game. Yeah, I'm one of those guys. Anyway, let's get to it. Our first stop is character creation. The actual process itself is pretty standard fare, though unfortunately the tab controls on the top were pretty difficult to spot at first. I even had another set of eyes in this situation because character creation is more fun when I let my wife do it, but neither of us saw it at first. That said, this pattern is used pretty frequently throughout the rest of the interface, so it's good that they establish it now. The only really negative experience here is the form validation when you name your character. One problem you can almost guarantee players will run into when naming their character in an online RPG is that their favorite name is already taken, much to my wife's disappointment here. You'll notice here that you're not actually informed that the name is already in use before committing to creating your character. This adds an unnecessary step to checking which names are available. It should show you the moment you've entered the text in. Thankfully, we eventually found an adequate name. I can't believe this wasn't taken. Next, let's talk about tutorials. The game makes good use of text pop-ups and arrows to guide you through the UI, but the teaching just kind of peters off after a bit. According to Jackson, more complex tasks like modifying weapons are never really explained to you in any later missions. It's also way too overwhelming to have the entire HUD on screen right away. Oh my god, what is happening? That is way too much. Oh, that's better. However, if you do happen to stumble upon the Help menu, which is oddly labeled as Intel, which brings you to a closed drop-down menu labeled Help, you'll find pretty much everything you need to know about the game, like its own little e-manual. Right off the bat, I'll say that this experience could be greatly improved by labeling it Help and then seeing everything inside of the current Help drop-down right away. Not that big of a deal, it's just kind of weird at first. The rest of the menu is actually very well done. Pretty much every aspect of the game is categorized for you to read, and it even uses these nice orange lights to indicate what you haven't read yet. It's surprisingly satisfying just to see all those little orange lights go away. This is one of the only electronic manuals in a game I've actually read all the way through. Though I did skip through the connect part, which is great because you could just scroll through really fast and it acknowledges that you read it. The typography could use a little bit of work though. The word description gets this massive column that could be used to spread out the text to make it more readable, and it's redundant as a label. One can infer that the text here is obviously a description of what you have selected. The drop-down structure could use a little work as well because currently it clashes with the way the UI scoots selected items over to the right. Still though, small nitpicks. This is a great menu, I just wish it was easier to find. The Quick menu is an elegant tool accessed by pressing right on the D-pad that groups all of the game's social interactions together like finding friends and emotes. It's fast, unintrusive, and adapts depending on what options are currently available to you. I love it, though I don't quite understand why the emotes and callouts are pushed so far down. Any moment where you want to call out for help or wave to someone will have passed by the time you scroll to these. That just makes going in for a high five or dancing a little awkward. I wasn't planning on covering Defiance's map screen, but there's some pretty neat stuff going on here that I don't often see. First of all, I want to commend it for making great use of color to have the icons pop off the map. This allows different icons to be more easily identified than games that take a more monochrome approach. The way setting a waypoint will intelligently follow roads whenever it can is also a nice touch, since the primary way of getting around this game is by car. The most unique thing here is the way you can use the D-pad to jump between icons rather than panning around using the analog stick. It's a bit unpredictable as far as which icon it's going to jump to, but I can see how this would be useful to someone who's dealing with a situation where there's too many icons close together and the analog stick isn't providing enough precision. There's also the ability to toggle map icons on and off. I would be very interested to see what the process was that led to this decision, because I would guarantee your average UX designer would lean more towards something that doesn't make users think as much, like the filters that you see in the Assassin's Creed games that group icons together. The answer could be as simple as the fact that this game simply has less icons than your average giant open world game, but this just feels like a decision that was made based on player feedback, and the best UX designers know that they need to listen to their users sometimes. Alright, we've covered a few sections of it, but let's talk about this game's overall massive menu. Each section of this thing has enough subsections to constitute an entire game on their own, so we're not going to be able to cover everything. Instead, we're going to focus on the overall experience of getting around. This is done using a radio menu I didn't even notice existed because the left trigger icon is separated from the rest of the on-screen controls. Though a bit hard to find, this radio menu is an excellent way to navigate between all of the other menus that are in this game. It must have been a pretty big undertaking to create a menu like this because it's one level of complexity more than your average game. Most of the time, one menu with tabs is enough for, say, your average fantasy RPG. But with everything available to you in Defiance, it made sense to take it one level of complexity further, and it makes sense to give your navigation a hierarchy, because it helps your users understand what level of the interface they're currently navigating. Further enhancing understanding is the great consistent use of patterns here, like using the left and right bumpers to navigate between sub-menus and the drop-downs that are found in the help menu. However, one consistent element that's not useful most of the time is this bottom bar here. Knowing how much money you have and your inventory capacity is only really useful on the character screen. Otherwise, it just increases mental load on menus that don't even need it, like the map screen. And here it's even covering up the legend. While it's important to maintain consistency, you should always make sure that every element on screen needs to be there. And if it doesn't, take it out. That's just one less thing that your users have to deal with. Overall, as a console MMO, I would consider Defiance a pretty impressive achievement, even if there are a few areas that need help and it could take some more time teaching you everything. And it's certainly much, much better than the other console MMO that I played one time. If there's ever another open beta for Final Fantasy XIV on PS4, now that I have the proper ability to be able to record my gameplay footage in high definition, that game's gonna get a talking to. And that wraps it up for this week, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Maybe check out some of the other videos, leave me some feedback, you know the drill. Oh, and I haven't said this in a while, but definitely make sure to let me know if you know of any good games that would be great to talk about on UXP. That's actually how this episode happened. Thanks, Jackson. And with that, I will see you all next week.